Welcome to the deep dive. So, you bring your sources, all those articles, notes, research, and, well, our job is to dive right in.
Yep, we pull out the key insights, the important stuff to help you get informed fast.
And today, we're tackling something many people deal with, arthrosis.
Right. And looking at the sources you've gathered, there are definitely some common ideas out there.
Yeah, things like, it's irreversible, it deforms joints, leads to immobility, dependence.
And the advice is almost always
Yeah.
rest, right? Avoid impact.
Exactly. But here's where these sources, well, they throw a curveball.
A big one. They really challenge those common beliefs. They suggest a lot of what people hear, maybe even from doctors sometimes, is, well, wrong.
Yeah, they even say that rest, that common advice, can be actual poison for arthrosis.
Poison. It's pretty provocative language.
It really is. So, our goal here, just using your sources, is to cut through some of those myths.
Let's figure out what these sources say is really going on and, importantly, what you might be able to do about it based on their perspective.
Okay, let's get into it. How do they even define arthrosis? Because it sounds like it's different from the usual understanding.
It really is. They describe it less as just a joint disease and more like, well, a natural physiological process.
Whoa, hang on. Natural. That changes things, doesn't it? Saying it's natural.
It completely reframes it. The idea presented is that the body is actually trying to do something. It's trying to seal or fuse or basically immobilize a structure.
Okay. Why?
Where-
Why would it do that?
Because, according to these sources, that structure isn't moving correctly. Maybe there's compression or some kind of biomechanical problem, muscle issues, even metabolic stuff going on.
So the arthrosis itself, the change in the joint, is the body's response to a problem, not the primary problem itself.
That's the core argument here, yeah. And if that's true...
Then the advice to just don't move or rest is your friend.
Exactly. It makes no sense in this framework. Your sources are blunt. They say that advice is nothing further from the reality. They argue pretty strongly that rest, immobility, actually makes arthrosis get worse, makes it advance faster. That bed is poison line is aimed squarely at that idea.
Okay, so if it's not just wear and tear from age and resting makes it worse,
Yeah.
what do they say is the real driver?
This is where it gets really interesting. They point to a system-wide issue. They link arthrosis very directly to the body being inflamed.
Okay.
Specifically what they call chronic, persistent, low-grade inflammation, that kind of background noise inflammation.
The silent inflammation we hear about affecting other things too.
Precisely. It's not just localized to the joint, it's a whole body state. And your sources actually list quite a few factors they believe contribute to this inflammation and therefore to arthrosis.
Okay, like what?
Things like chronic poor sleep, high cortisol, from ongoing stress. And this one surprised me a bit. Regular use of antacids.
Antacids, like for heartburn, how?
Yeah, specifically proton pump inhibitors. The sources argue they can interfere with nutrient absorption.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Which, impacts overall health and the body's ability to manage inflammation and repair itself. It's presented as another piece of the puzzle.
Got it. What else is on that list?
Well, some things we might expect more, but still framed systemically. Lack of movement is a big one, especially lack of, strength training,
Right.
being overweight or obese, naturally, but also malnutrition, and they define that broadly. It could be from being overweight but lacking nutrients, or just generally not getting what the body needs.
So it's about the quality of the fuel, not just the quantity.
Exactly. They also mention little contact with nature and sort of conceptually choosing the wrong path. They use the example of, say, spending money on collagen supplements.
Okay.
Their point is those supplements won't do much if the underlying issues, the inflammation, the gut problems aren't fixed first. You're treating a symptom, not the cause.
That list definitely shifts the focus away from just the joint, doesn't it? It's the whole system. Now, you mentioned a big myth earlier.
Yes, this is crucial to their argument. Your sources state very clearly, arthrosis itself does not cause pain.
Okay, hold on. That goes against everything most people think. If the joint is changing, deforming, how does that not hurt?
They separate the structural, change the arthrosis from the sensation of pain. According to this view, the pain people often feel is more tied to the inflammation around the joint. Or maybe the original reason the body started the arthrotic process, like that instability or biomechanical issue. But the actual presence of the deformed joint structure itself, they argue that's not the direct pain generator.
Wow. So the pain isn't from the damage itself, but more from the inflammation that's causing the body to react.
That seems to be the perspective, yeah.
Huh.
Deal with the inflammation and the root causes, and the pain should lessen, even if the X-ray still shows the structural changes.
That's a hopeful way to look at it, actually. Okay, let's talk diet. Big driver of inflammation. Right?
Yeah.
What do these sources say to avoid? What generates arthrosis?
Okay, yeah, they have a clear list. Number 1, refined flours and industrial carbs. Basically, anything that spikes your blood sugar really high, causing hyperglycemia,
Makes sense.
then gluten. And they're quite specific here, mentioning gliadin, a component of gluten. They claim it always causes some inflammation, even if you aren't celiac.
Always. Even traces.
That's the claim in these sources. They really target industrial flours, suggesting cutting way back or eliminating them entirely.
So it's a broader inflammatory view of gluten, not just about diagnosed sensitivity.
That's how it's presented, yes. Next, refined table sugar. And really, generalized sugar is anything that turns into sugar fast in your body.
Right.
Dairy is also on the list, especially cow's milk. They point to the caseins.
But what about calcium? Strong bones.
They tackle that head on. They say calcium in commercial milk is often added anyway, and things like broccoli actually have more. Their claim is pretty bold. Cow's milk causes arthrosis.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Directly challenging that common wisdom.
Very directly. Also on the avoid list, sodas, they say they confuse and intoxicate. Alcohol, cigarettes, drugs, and they mention many medications, suggesting a critical look is needed.
A broad sweep there.
Yeah, and as a kind of rule of thumb for processed foods, they suggest asking, could my ancestors have eaten this 1,000 years ago? If not, it's probably not helping, according to this view.
That's a simple, if tough, filter. Okay, so that's the don't eat list. What about the do eat or can help side?
They offer alternatives. Instead of those industrial flours, maybe almond or oat flour, using things like egg or seeds to bind them.
Okay.
For sweetness, the idea is more about retraining your palate to appreciate natural flavors, suggesting even things like stevia keep you hooked on that hyper-sweet taste.
So getting back to basics, less processed food.
Pretty much. When it comes to dairy, they lean towards fermented options, good quality Greek yogurt, kefir, but stress avoiding the sugary industrial version.
Fermented is okay then.
Seems so. And they highlight something interesting, coffee with MCT oil.
MCT oil, like medium chain triglycerides in coffee. How does that link to joints?
Yeah, like a sort of semi-bulletproof coffee, maybe especially when fasted. The connection they make is that it helps nudge the body towards being more ketogenic.
Keto. Go right.
They argue that this metabolic state helps lower that chronic silent inflammation, gives you metabolic flexibility, and might even help with joint regeneration. MCT oil provides that fatty ketogenic energy, kind of displacing glucose.
So using metabolism to fight the inflammation and maybe even repair things.
That's the connection they draw, yeah. It fits into this broader theme of conscious, ancestral, or paleo-style eating they mention.
Right.
And one thing they really emphasize is bone broth.
Okay, that feels more traditional, like something grandma would suggest for joints.
Totally. And the sources agree, saying it's a natural way to support joint health. They suggest finding organic sources if you can, and point out you can use it in lots of cooking.
Makes sense.
And this is where they contrast it sharply with those hydrolyzed collagen supplements again.
Right, saying the supplements might be useless
If your gut isn't working right, or you've got metabolic issues, the natural collagen from broth, they imply, is different, especially when the foundation is healthier. Fix the gut first.
Fix the foundation.
Got it.
Okay, we've covered definition, myths, causes, diet. The sources also mention where your arthrosis typically shows up, right? Knees, hips.
Yeah, knees, hips, spine, hands, even the TMJ, the jaw joint.
Jaw joint, too.
Yep. And they add some context. Knee and hip arthrosis. Often linked to being overweight, they see it as a double whammy, the mechanical stress plus the systemic inflammation from the excess weight.
Okay.
Hand arthrosis, they link not just to manual labor, but also potentially chemical exposures.
Yeah.
And TMJ issues like that clicking sound some people get.
Yeah.
They see that clicking as a sign of underlying mechanical problems that can eventually lead to arthrosis there.
Interesting connection with the jaw clicking.
Yeah.
But the sources also differentiate arthrosis from related conditions like osteoporosis.
Yes, they clarify these terms, which is helpful. Arthrosis, in their view, is that deformation, the structural change in the joint. Starts with cartilage problems, leads to friction, wear, more deformation. Caused by wear, sure, but also lack of nutrients, biomechanical problems, and crucially, inflammation.
Okay, arthrosis is the structural degeneration. Then what's osteopenia?
Osteopenia is the bones starting to weaken, losing minerals. Osteoporosis is when that weakening is more severe.
Right.
And the sources connect these bone density issues often to a problem, again, with the stomach, specifically not having enough stomach acid.
The stomach again. How does low acid weaken bones? That
Yep.
seems counterintuitive.
Well, the argument is you need good stomach acid to break down food properly and actually absorb minerals like calcium, magnesium, all the stuff bones need.
Oh.
If your stomach acid is too low, you're not getting those minerals efficiently from your food. So the body, needing those minerals for other critical functions, starts to kind of mine them from your bones. It degrades bone tissue to get what it needs.
Wow. So bone health isn't just about swallowing calcium pills. It's about whether your digestion can even use the minerals you consume. Starts in the stomach.
According to this perspective, absolutely. And then finally, they define arthritis as the persistent and painful inflammation of a joint.
So arthritis is the inflammation, arthrosis is the structural change.
Exactly. And they note you can definitely have both at the same time. A joint can be deformed and inflamed and painful. Or, as they argued earlier, you could potentially have the structural change of arthrosis without significant pain if the inflammation isn't the main issue at that moment.
Okay, that distinction is really important. Let's circle back to solutions then. If inflammation, gut issues, lack of movement, bad sleep are the big drivers, what are the key actions these sources recommend?
The absolute foundation, the number one thing according to them, is you have to lower that systemic inflammation.
Right.
And where does that start? They say overwhelmingly the intestine, the gut.
Okay. How are the gut and joints linked so strongly in this view?
They talk about things like a permeable gut or leaky gut where the gut lining isn't intact, dysbiosis and imbalance in your gut bacteria, and endotoxemia, basically, toxins leaking from the gut back into your bloodstream.
So stuff gets through the gut barrier that shouldn't, triggering inflammation body-wide, which then affects the joints.
That's the mechanism described. They also mention a paralyzed intestine, meaning things like chronic constipation, diarrhea, IBS, which they term visceral hypersensitivity. Fixing the gut is positioned as absolutely crucial, not just for digestion, but to stop feeding that systemic inflammatory fire.
Gut health first. Makes sense. What else?
Move your body. Critically, with impact. They come back to this to hammer home the point against reposo, against rest.
They really don't like rest for this.
No. They argue rest actually inhibits the biological processes your joints need to stay healthy or potentially repair. Movement, even impact, provides necessary signals.
So impact isn't the enemy. Lack of movement, lack of those signals is the bigger problem in this view.
That's the argument. And this thinking extends to how they view something like the RICE method, rest, ice, compression, elevation.
Yeah. Standard advice for injuries.
They push back on it, especially the ice part. For many things, like sprains where there isn't a full rupture, they argue ice actually stops the necessary inflammatory process the body uses to heal.
Wait, stops the healing process. I thought inflammation was bad.
In their view, acute inflammation is a critical and necessary part of repair. You don't want chronic, low-grade inflammation, but that initial inflammatory response to injury, that's your body sending in the repair crews. Suppressing it with ice too early, they argue, can hinder healing.
So let the body do its initial inflammatory work. That's
I
different.
It is. Okay, another huge one, sleep. Prioritizing correct, coherent, deep, restorative night sleep. Aiming for around 8 hours.
Why specifically night sleep?
Because that's when the magic happens, according to them. Growth hormone release crucial for cartilage remodeling, liver regeneration, immune system activity, and, importantly for the gut link, the migrating motor complex, which sweeps the intestines clean.
Ah, the gut cleanup crew works at night.
Exactly. They argue these nighttime processes are actually more important for joint health than daytime activity. And they strongly advise against sleep aids, saying they disrupt these vital natural cycles.
So quality night sleep isn't optional. It's active joint maintenance time.
That's the message. And connected to sleep, of course, is stress. Managing chronic stress, that high cortisol.
Cortisol connection again.
They explain high cortisol basically drains the energy needed for repair and messes up your sleep. So finding moments to just pause, breathe during the day becomes really important.
Stress literally steals resources from repair.
Exactly.
Exactly.
They also give nods to contact with nature, saying there's science backing its benefits for overall well-being, including joints, and sun exposure for vitamin D.
Bones, yeah.
But with a caveat, it helps, but not if it's layered on top of a bad diet and generally unhealthy habits. Context matters.
So get sun, but fix the foundation first.
Yeah.
It all seems to come back to that, that anecdote you mentioned from the source about the old man.
Yeah, with the two knees. Same age, but only one hurt.
Exactly. When asked why just one hurt, he's like, well, this other one's the same age and it's fine.
It perfectly illustrates their point, doesn't it?
Right.
Age itself isn't the main driver. It's the accumulation over time, how nutrients were managed, how much inflammation was present, how the body was moved or not moved.
Yeah, and they mentioned young athletes getting arthrosis and some 100-year-olds not having it. It really drives home that it's more about lifestyle and internal environment than just the calendar years.
It really shifts the perspective, puts more control back in the individual's hands, potentially.
This has been really eye-opening. So to kind of wrap up the core message from these sources.
Okay, the main takeaway seems to be arthrosis, as presented here, isn't necessarily this inevitable downhill slide purely because of age, and rest isn't the answer.
Right.
Instead, they frame it as a physiological process, maybe even manageable, that's heavily influenced by things within your control. Systemic inflammation, gut health, diet, movement, sleep, stress.
And that view really does put more power back with you, the listener. It suggests focusing on these lifestyle foundations, rather than just accepting a diagnosis or blaming your age.
Yeah, it shifts focus from just managing symptoms to actively tackling what these sources see as the root causes the inflammation, the metabolic issues, and supporting the body's own ability to find balance.
So a final thought for everyone listening, building on this interconnectedness. Just how deeply linked are all these different parts of your life? Your gut, your sleep, your movement, your stress, your food, with how your joints feel and function. These sources suggest it's all profoundly connected. A truly holistic view might be needed.